Welcome to this week's Desk Side Chat. We're excited this week to have Joe Conroy joining us. Many of you know and love Joe and his LinkedIn content. He's been one of the folks who's been very transparent, Joe, as you've been growing your practice, as you've been engaging with your clients, both entertaining but informative in terms of what you've been putting out. We really appreciate you joining us to share a little bit more insight this week.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate being included. I'm excited to join today.
Outstanding. Well, the topic this week, Joe, is sell and stay, have your cake and eat it too. And the theme for this month is practice growth. And so there are obviously numerous ways to grow a practice. Acquisition is certainly one of them. Before we jump into that topic, though, if you could provide just a quick background on yourself, your experience in Hartford Retirement Planners.
Sure. So, certified financial planner. I wrote the book Decades in Decisions, Financial Planning at Any Age. I've been in the business. I joined after a very brief stint at a different firm, an LPL group, I think in 2008. And I had some previous industry experience before then, but really full-time all in 08. I've been with LPL since. About the year 2020, specifically March of 2020 was when I rebranded and I opened up my own office, Hartford Retirement Planners. I had an existing practice. I just kind of did a rebranding, and we did a ribbon cutting ceremony on March 5th. 2020, which, was an interesting time to open my business and then shut it 2 weeks later with the rest of the world shutting down.
Yeah.
But it makes for a good story. And it actually, it didn't hurt business. I'll put it that way. So, so that's my background. You mentioned LinkedIn. It's kind of interesting. I really started posting proactively and consistently around 2019. So when I have my own brand to kind of promote and advertise, I said, I need to get a bigger audience. It was around the time my book came out. And so I'm really sharing the growth of Hartford Retirement Planners, and we've had a lot of it over the last few years. So it's been kind of an interesting journey, and it's fun to have people follow along with us. So.
Well, and it's something that it's giving you an opportunity to stay connected with current clients, maybe get the word out, find new clients, and then even as far as networking and growing, there may be some additional partnerships, things that can happen down the road. Which, tying us into this topic this week, as you've been growing, right? You've got a lot of irons in the fire. How have you looked at acquisition for yourself, beyond just simply organic growth? How did that mentality really start to take shape in your practice as you look to continue growing? Sure.
So it was all organic growth up until I think it was 2017 or 2018. The place where I was previously, it was multiple advisors, and it was a silo setup where each advisor owned their own practice. There was just kind of an umbrella group that we operated under. So one of the advisors, and things were going well up to this point, but one of the advisors had started to get the questions from his clients, hey, when are you thinking about retiring? How long are you going to keep doing this, right? And I think once your clients start asking the retirement advisors when their retirement's going to start, it's probably a little too late for succession planning or really time to get serious about it. So there were, I don't know, maybe like 10 other advisors in that office, and he and I had a really good fit. Come to find out, just because here in Baltimore, it's small town, it's a one handshake, everybody kind of has some type of connection to each other. So we ended up knowing that my wife played soccer, and Jim, who was the retiring advisor, was a soccer ref around Baltimore, and he was actually reffing my wife, and we didn't know that until we had been working together for several years. So it was funny how we kind of knew each other. previously in some way. But so he's looking around, he's looking for someone to take over. At that point, I think I was in my maybe mid or late 20s. And I had gotten my CFP. I had written several articles and local publications, different financial planning topics. So I think he liked that, just the way that I carried myself. So we did a couple of meetings together just before he really approached me and eventually said, you know what, Joe, like I'm thinking about retiring. Would you want to be my successor? And I said, absolutely. You know, tell me what you think that looks like, and we'll kind of figure it out together. So that was really kind of what started the acquisition thought process for me, and kind of opening myself to that as a strategy of growth.
So obviously a large amount of this business, any business, is based on trust. So clients had been working with him. There's a lot of trust, a lot of existing relationships. How did that transition process go, for clients? How did you earn that trust early on as you began engaging with clients?
Yeah, it was probably a couple of things. So once we decided that we were going to move together, and that I was going to eventually take over his practice, we did a lot of meetings together, and Jim was really good about giving me space in meetings to demonstrate my ability and knowledge, and get a better understanding of clients, their backgrounds, and there's actually a real big benefit to it that was kind of unintended, was having a fresh set of eyes, right? So Jim's been working with these people for 20 plus years, and I can come in and I've got the freedom to say, well, why did you do this? Or what's the relationship with this family member? Or so having that fresh set of eyes, I think, helped deepen the client relationship and get a better understanding of really what's making these people tick and how we can help them.
How long, Joe, in your case, was that transition period?
Yeah. So it was kind of a handshake, gentleman's agreement. Let's do a bunch of meetings together, introduce you to clients. So that way, they don't just get surprised by some letter in the mail. Ooh, this is going to be the person that's helping you going forward. And they're thinking, what's happening here? We don't want that. So it was probably a couple of years. We really didn't even have an agreement put in place. We had talked about kind of what we wanted, numbers and timelines and things like that, but we didn't document it for probably a year and a half to 2.5 years. But the total process, I would say, was maybe 1 or 2 years of introductions, joint meetings, things like that, because he wasn't in a rush. So this was more of, he was trying to get ahead of the succession plan rather than do the scramble at the last minute, which was great. And go ahead.
No, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, so it was a really natural process, and eventually, when we did end up signing the agreements and everything, there was still several years, and not because I needed him to be there, but because he wanted to still be involved and transition over time, and when it felt right, not when some piece of paper said so. And that was one thing I was very upfront with him about, was, I'm not this young hotshot coming in here and I'm kicking you out and everybody needs to know there's a new sheriff in town. I didn't want that at all. It was, there's a lot of value and a lot of experience in his head, and that there's, a big benefit to us and to clients by keeping him around and knowing the different dynamics. So I didn't want to push him out, and I wanted it to be natural, and that's the way that it ended up working for us.
So over those couple of years, as you have this gentleman's agreement in place, I mean, was there anything official as like split rep codes? Was there a transition from a financial standpoint, or was this something where you just phased into the actual buy?
We had a couple cases that were split rep codes. Nothing big from what I can remember. It was just kind of a one-off here, there. We had some, but I'd known them for 10 years, working together side by side in the same office. And even though we weren't joint advisors on the same cases, Monday through Friday, we were, just down the hall from each other. So there was a lot of history there. And I knew that he was somebody that I could trust. And that trust is so important. I think agreements are good because it memorializes what the intent is. But if someone's intentions is to pull a fast one on you, there's no agreement in the world that's perfect. So if you can't have that trust, without that trust, the agreements, it doesn't matter so much, in my opinion. Now, I'm not saying don't do agreements, right? I think they're super important, but we had a good level of familiarity and trust before we memorialized it with some signatures.
which really is important for you, obviously,
Yes.
as a buyer. It's important for him, but it's also important for the clients to
Yes.
have something where like you said, you're coming in and you don't want to completely upset things. He has a lot of experience, his existing relationship, but you are coming with new ideas and fresh face. I mean, it's important. Early on, you mentioned that it's almost too late when your clients start asking. Like, if you can kind of
Right.
get ahead of things a little bit, you're going to be better off. And so again, this serves you, it serves him, and it serves the clients as well.
Yeah. And in these joint meetings, I think what he did such a great job, and what helped with the success of the transition, which was wildly successful, he let me talk, right? And it was one of the things that I really brought to the table was financial planning software and using a formalized system for retirement planning. That was something that wasn't as formalized the way that he did it. So it was a really good way for, hey, here's Joe. If anything ever happens to me, if my wife pushes me in front of a bus one day, Joe's here. He knows all of my clients' information, and he does this retirement planning software so well. I think it would really benefit you. So it was a good way for me to go in there and kind of start demonstrating proficiency and things like that. And I don't know if this comes as a surprise now. I've got 3 kids. They've kind of aged me a bit, but I was a little bit fresher face back then. So sometimes people were sitting there like, we had one client, it was funny. He was the type who would, joke around and try to give you a hard time, really dry wit. And it was so funny. He said, well, all right, Joe, what do you know about financial planning? And I said, okay. I said, a good amount. I said,
Young whippersnapper.
Right. I was like, well, actually, I wrote a book and I slid it across the table, and I did it while I was laughing. I didn't want to be obnoxious with it. But he was the type of guy where he just looked and he laughed. He's like, okay, all right, let's just get right into it. But yeah, so there were a couple of funny things, and it's always interesting getting to know people. And then sometimes Jim would give me a little bit of the background story with a couple, and then in the meeting, something would happen. He's like, oh, I forgot to tell you that this or this, which wasn't a negative, but it was just kind of a funny thing where you're always surprised in meetings. You never know where they're going to go at times. It was a really smooth transition process because there wasn't this deadline. He wanted somebody to carry the baton, right? And I didn't run track and field in high school or anything, but when you go and you pass that baton, there's a point in time where you're joined together, right? You got a few steps where you're making sure that it's secure before you then take off and hopefully run a good lap. So we had a good amount of time where we were securing that baton as we were passing it from one to the other. And it's funny, we talk on a weekly basis, still comes into the office, great person, great friend, good mentor. And, now I talk to him and he's like, Joe, I'm so glad that I'm retired. He said, I don't have to worry about tax deadlines or making sure that someone gets their, Roth IRA contribution at the final hour, and we're, scrambling. So he's very much enjoying retirement, and we're very much enjoying the types of clients that he served and we continue to serve. It's great people.
And again, so much is trust. I love how you said, he trusted you to start talking, because that's something that has come up in these meetings and our discussions over the last couple of months, is scenarios where in a couple of scenarios, I just thinking of it off the top of my head, where there's a dynamic of a parent and a child inheriting the business, and
Right.
you hear, I kicked my dad out of the room, or I gotta, I had to kind of, force myself into the conversation, because as we know in this industry, there's so many egos. There's so much where, people want to, get that, get their opinion in or get their thoughts in. So I think that's
Right.
so important, that trust element where he felt comfortable allowing you to really take over the conversations and really be seen as that go-to person for the clients.
Yeah, the irony is he's very good at it. I'm not. I get excited about explaining financial topics, and I'm a talker, and I get on the whiteboard and I'm drawing pictures, I'm doing all this stuff. And I got to remind myself when we're doing joint meetings that, let someone else have the stage and present things a little bit. So I'm the one that's got to get out of the room and go like take a lap and come back to make sure that that everybody here in the office has a chance to give their valuable input. So I'd probably be a tough one to do a succession plan with, but I got a ways to go before I can really think about that.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about that for a long time. As you started to approach I guess the transition period, like you said, there's a long period of time.
Yep.
It's you're transitioning. So how did you start to formalize things? Was that something that you brought up, that he brought up? Like, how did things actually start, moving to where you put pen to paper?
So phase one, I heard it from one of your desk side chats. There's the dating, the engagement, and then the marriage, right?
Yeah.
And that really resonated with me because it's very true with the succession. You can do a shotgun wedding, right? Or you're just speeding everything up, but we didn't do that in this case. So from the time that he identified me as the successor, we kind of came to a rough understanding of what things were going to look like. And what I would say is radical transparency and open communication so important during this phase. And I think the advisors buying the practice might be afraid of asking certain questions because you don't want to spook a seller. I saw some statistic, there's maybe 50 buyers for every seller on like FP transitions or something like that. But you have to, because what you don't want to do is get into a bad deal, and you could have prevented that, or more importantly, saved everybody time and aggravation by just knowing what some of the things were ahead of time. So I told Jim, I said, look, I'm happy to do these meetings and things. I said, but I'm kind of like a fish on the hook here. Just don't drag me behind the boat forever. You got to reel it in, and we got to make sure this thing happens. And we were good about communicating that. So about a year or two of coordinating, planning, talking. As things went on, it got more and more, I'll say time intensive, but we spent more intentional about the different steps we were taking, because I still had a practice. And at that point, my practice was of equal size. So, but the process with LPL at that time, they've got a whole mergers and acquisitions department, which worked really well for us. We kind of already identified, I'm going to be the buyer, he's the seller. We knew roughly what we wanted our terms to be, and LPL, it was an LPL to LPL buyout. So, they provided the different documentation. So they've got sample contracts, Word documents. We kind of changed things the way that we saw them. We ran it through an attorney so we could make sure that both of us were protected and everything was clearly lined out. So once we got those agreements, I think they were dated for the future to take hold. And that was something that I wanted to make sure that I was on the boat and I wasn't continuing to be dragged behind. Not that I felt that way, but to prevent that. So we had our date, we had the agreements. That took maybe 3 to 6 months because we weren't in any rush. So we kind of did it over time, and it was nice because we got to think things and absorb it rather than react, So that was the timeline. So I would say a successful transition for somebody that isn't in a rush to get out of the business, a year of meet and greets. And during that time, you could consecutively or concurrently rather, come up with the terms, the agreements, the contracts, and then start your transition out. And then really, as the subject sell and stay is, how long do you want to be around and how involved do you want to be? And it was interesting with Jim because you get to see the financial advisor who works on people's retirements every day, all day, actually go through it himself. And it was very different being on the other side of the table, right? So in the beginning, he was in 40 hours a week, Monday through Friday. It was like nothing changed. I thought, great, we've got extra help. This is perfect. And then over time, he got more and more comfortable, and it wasn't me saying, hey, you should not come in and any of that. He just found different activities that he wanted to do. So over the next probably 2 years, he just kind of faded off and joined a weekly men's golf club. So he's playing golf at different courses on Thursdays with the same group of guys. I remember he did a trip to the Mediterranean. This was pre-COVID. And he called me afterwards. He said, Joe, I didn't think once about any emails or any phone calls. I think that 2 weeks of being gone and not having that in the back of his mind was one of the big moments for him. And I think it made him feel like he wanted to retire, not like he had to. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's, again, this speaks to trust. It speaks to, getting ahead of things where he has the peace of mind of knowing that, this is taken care of. The clients, feel comfortable as we were talking about, and really gets ahead of it before there's so many scenarios, right? Where it becomes a crisis moment. There's a health situation, or there's something where, like, I guess you kind of said shotgun wedding. There's these scenarios where things just don't work out as smooth and as nice a glide path again for all parties involved. So it sounds like, though, you didn't have a formal agreement as far as his time in the business, or this was something that he had that epiphany moment, and just I mean, there wasn't any formal process for that. It just happened naturally, as you described, Joe.
He had gone through a buyout of his partner, and that was a shotgun wedding. Unfortunately, his partner felt ill and very quickly was not able to continue to work. So at the end of the term of that agreement was kind of, I guess, his clean break of, all right, now that I'm through that transition, what is my transition going to look like? And that was when we started to talk. And he didn't want his clients to have the same kind of abrupt change as the previous advisor's clients. Everybody was taken care of, but he wanted something that made a little bit more sense and that he could control, right? He wanted to be in the driver's seat, as I think most advisors like being, is in control of our own destinies. And that was what really prompted him to start the conversation. But like I said, we had like a handshake agreement for probably a year and a half before we had a written agreement. And then it was maybe 2 years of him kind of working out over time as he wanted to, which is nice. In our work as actual advisors working with clients, I always find that clients are in a better place when they have the ability to kind of work out over time, maybe do consulting part-time. But quitting work cold turkey is kind of a tough adjustment for most folks. So whether it's an individual client or an advisor looking to quit working, that kind of time to kind of transition out, I think mentally and all the other things make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And again, it serves all parties involved. As far as the way you're describing, you didn't want to be a fish on a hook, kind of being dragged along as you're going through, but also there's 30, 40, 50 buyers per practice, radical transparency. Was he investigating other options? Did he, was that part of your transparency to say, hey, Joe's it, like there's no other option? Like how did that play out, Joe?
Yeah. So there was one other potential buyer that he approached first, which I don't hold against them. So had some initial dialogues, but just didn't get the warm and fuzzies. I think there was a little bit of inaction. I don't know. But after that, he said, this doesn't feel like a good fit from what he saw early on. And then he kind of restarted his search. Like I said, there's about 10 other advisors in the same office. So he had a group of people. It wasn't incredibly important because the way that we operated as silos, the name of the business was really just to help make sense for clients, but every advisor had their own practice. So for him, it was nice to have different options within the same group. And then some clients maybe don't really understand that silo group structure. So having a continuity of names kind of eased the transition. Although it was interesting when we transitioned from that group and then creating my own and breaking away and doing my own office, we never lost anybody. And everybody seemed to understand that it made sense. So switching, I guess the point of me bringing that up is switching a name really doesn't make that much sense. I think clients are more interested in knowing that there is a succession plan. And I think they want the advisor that's been guiding them for 10, 20, 30 plus years to do that homework on behalf of the client. I think clients are relieved to know that somebody's been handpicked or a group or whatever it is. And you have that inherent trust rather than just, hey, I'm out, good luck. But I'll be like in a pool or like, on a beach somewhere, so don't call me. I think clients are tough because then they're looking and they haven't looked for an advisor in 10, 20, 30 years. Starting fresh, that's kind of a daunting task. Do you interview a few people? Do you want to make sure it's for a lot of folks that are in retirement, it's hard. You want somebody to do all that work and somebody who knows the business, right? So us advisors, we can see through the BS of the bad apples that seem to ruin it for the rest of the bunch, and I think if an advisor can find the good apples and then do a good handoff, it's good for clients, it's good for the selling advisor because you got a clean conscience, and it's good for the selling advisor because there's usually monetary compensation involved for making that handoff. That's why it seems to work so well, and that's part of the beauty of this setup.
And if you're doing it right, you're doing comprehensive wealth management, you're probably at least beginning, if not formally, engaging with the next generation in a client's household and starting to expand, not just share a wallet with an individual client, but really developing a relationship with the family. So as money transitions to the next generation, as the process becomes deeper and in the relationship that much stronger, it's insanely important, right, to have that transition. Like you said, you could have a client who's just like looking around like, what do I do now, as opposed to having that nice easy transition.
It was interesting. We have a client, great client that we work with. He came to us in his 70s. And he said, I am looking for an advisor in their 40s. I said, well, that's not me. I'm in my 30s. He's like, close enough, whatever. He said, but I'll tell you what, Joe, he's like, I'm so tired of trying to find new dentists, new doctors, new accountants. He's like, I'm going young, all these young professionals, because I don't want to go through this stuff when I'm in my 80s and I'm really don't feel like doing it now. I know I'm not going to want to do that, add 10, 15 years, right? And it was kind of a light bulb moment. I said, well, it seems so obvious, but for me, it made a lot of sense. So he was kind of trying to find that sweet spot of somebody that had experience like me, but was also young enough to be in the business for a long time. So I showed him pictures of my little kids. He's like, yeah, they're young enough. You're going to be doing this for a while. All right. And I think it's kind of the same way with these advisor succession plans where, all these clients, they don't want to have to go, flip the script and start from scratch and try to find somebody new and build that same relationship. Clients want that path to continue the good work. And I think the advisor also has the opportunity to vet someone out that's got a similar style, right? Because different advisors who are very good have different styles, and some philosophies are different than others, right? Product selection, retirement planning, tax, whatever. You're not going to find a clone of yourself that happens to be 30 or 20 years younger, whatever it might be. But you can find somebody where the value systems are the same and the same principles. I think that's important. So, and for me as a buyer of a practice, the last thing I want to do, I want to build trust. And the last thing I want to do is go in and say, oh my gosh, you've been doing this the whole time. Oh, this is terrible, right? So that's where I think buyers need to be very aware of, instead of just trying to get to buy a practice, buy the right practice, buy one that is a good fit. Because it's very difficult to try to, people are very good at picking up. If you're not believing in what you're doing here, if you're just trying to continue what was done before, but it's really not something you believe in, everyone's going to know that. And it's going to muddy the waters so much. And when real decisions and things need to happen, if you don't have that conviction, the clients are going to get confused and nervous. Maybe bad things might happen, or decisions or mistakes could come up. So from a buyer standpoint, I think it's important, just a high level, right? It's not like we have to like the same ice cream or anything like that, but we both have to at least like ice cream. And maybe the flavors will be a little bit different.
Well, it's a different flavor, but I like how we said, we said sell and stay, but sell in, how did you say it?
Fade.
Fade. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So fade, like,
Right.
it's not a hard stop. It's a, transition. So that's a good analogy, right? It's a different flavor, which is important too, a different flavor of ice cream. Cause things are changing, tax laws changing. There's the software is becoming more and more robust. So it's important to have a fresh set of eyes, but that doesn't mean completely upsetting the apple cart.
Right. And we're talking about sell and stay, but I've had conversations where they want a quick transition. Joe, I don't want to drag this thing out. Like, I'm ready to retire. And I think when people are ready, it's the same process. It's just, instead of taking your time because you want to, you just compress it, and it's still effective. But if anything, I think it's a good motivator. I think a lot of the problem, and one of the ones, just to use that fish analogy one more time, my fear as a buyer is, we're not really digging ditches or breaking boulders in this business, and we work with people we like, right? And if you're an advisor and you've been giving advice, you like being there for people and giving advice, and that's kind of a tough push and pull to leave the business. So, but then there's other advisors who are ready, and I just want to find a good fit. I want to do some introductions, hand off. You're in great hands with Joe and his team, and that's it. So there's a couple of different options. The sell and stay isn't the only one that works. It just happens to be the one we're talking about today.
Well, this is a topic that we are going to continue to return to many, many times. Those of you who've been following this process the whole time know that this is something that has really pushed me hard, is seeing a lot of advisors out there who, unfortunately, one example I've said before is I had a guy cry to me in his office, this advisor who was forced into a situation. And I'm like, man, there's so many Joes out there. Like, we could have handled this, we could have had this so much easier for you. And so, what I'm hoping that we can do, among many things, is provide an opportunity, not just, you kind of call people out and say, hey, you need to do this ahead of time, but give them options, right? It's transparency. Like you said, so much of it does come down to having the right fit, but there are so many different, again, there's a lot of Joes out there. There's a lot of opportunities. And so, hopefully by turning on the lights, hopefully by having these transparent, open conversations, we're going to help a lot of advisors get ahead of scenarios before it's too late.
Yeah. And I think you get to write your own scripts if you're ahead of it. So, and there's different structures. So FP transitions, I know LPL. So it's a big ecosystem with LPL, and I've been with LPL for however many years now. It's been a while. Their M&A team is really, really good, in my opinion. Not perfect, but they'll help value the deal, and then you could get hey, write me a check, walk away. Here's what that looks like. Or I want to pick my successor, but I'm not ready to hang it up yet, and you craft what that looks like. So you could sell and monetize a portion of your business and continue to work it and continue to draw a salary from it, and then monetize the rest of it later and get some appreciation of the growth if you've been able to grow it while you've sold a portion and you continue to stay. So there's a million different ways to do it. You could get, an earn out basis. I know that's the big thing whenever I have conversations with advisors is, what are the valuations, right? Like, what are the prices people are paying? There's higher multiples on recurring revenue, lower multiples on commissions. That should seem pretty obvious. It really depends on the demographics of the client base. If you've got $100 million book of business, but it's 10 families that are all 70 and over that make up the 100 million, that's not going to be worth as much as a $100 million business with 40, 50, 60-year-olds, and there's maybe 50 of them, right? Spread that risk out. So those are some of the different factors that go into these valuation tools. But evaluation tools are also kind of a guideline. It's not like you have to use them. And that's where a good partnership with a seller and a buyer, you just have really frank conversations about what you want to get out of it and see if it makes sense for both of you. Usually, you kind of start here and then there's here, and in the middle is kind of where it makes most sense. I heard from an attorney that I respect very, very highly. He said, "Joe, you always want to leave meat on the bone." And I'm a sucker for an analogy. So I was like, all right, I love it. Tell me about that. He said, the deals that I've worked on, which has been hundreds and hundreds in his experience, he said, you want to leave meat on the bone because there's always going to be something that you come back to, and you want to make sure that both parties are still feeling relatively good about the arrangement. If there's blood in the water, you don't need to go in there and try to squeeze every last thing because somebody's vulnerable, or maybe they do have like a health thing that's come up and they've got a quick timeline. Like, don't take advantage of people, which should be obvious, but I'm going to say that anyway. He said, but here's what happens. He's like, down the road, you're going to need something from somebody. You just are, because nothing's perfect, clean cut. Or, in this kind of scenario, a client might listen to what I have to say, and then they're going to go back to that trusted advisor they've had for 25 years and say, hey, does that make sense what Joe's saying here? And you don't want that person to have a sour taste, like, oh, Joe, I feel like he really tried to get one over on me in the deal and I'm kind of dissatisfied. So you know what, I don't know if I would trust what he says with that. You don't want that. You want both people to be aligned, and that only benefits the clients too. So I think a good deal is where you meet in the middle and everybody feels like they got a fair shake. It's not this, let me pay the lowest possible price. I'm happy to pay what I think it's worth, even though that might be more than what others would be willing to pay, because I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And when that advisor does get that phone call, or the former advisor, that they're not, angry with me over something because I negotiated and try to strong arm them into something. So leave some meat on the bone. I thought that was great advice, and I
like that. Yeah, I like that analogy. Maybe Elon Musk is watching this, or will watch this video, and he can see how to transact and leave a little meat on the bone. We'll see. Let's go ahead and finish the formal portion of this meeting. We'll jump into our backstage pass portion with the existing members. Joe, thank you so much for all of your insight. Really appreciate you jumping in.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.